What if the doctor you trusted with your child's life was secretly keeping her in a coma just to steal your money? This is the story of one nurse who risked everything to uncover a truth more shocking than anyone could imagine. It was just after 3 in the morning at St. Mary's Medical Center in Chicago, one of the most reputable hospitals in the city. The building was unusually silent at that hour, save for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the faint squeak of nurses' shoes against polished linoleum floors. Danielle Foster, a young ICU nurse known for her dedication, was completing her rounds in the pediatric intensive care unit. She had worked countless overnight shifts before, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to overhear. As Danielle passed the medication storage room, she noticed the door wasn't fully closed. From inside came the sound of low voices. She paused, immediately recognizing one of them. It belonged to Dr. Henry Marshall, the hospital's most respected neurologist. Patients and families trusted him implicitly. He had been at St. Mary's for over 15 years, building a reputation as a man of honor. But the words she heard chilled her. $300,000 this month alone, Henry said, his tone dripping with satisfaction. Michael doesn't even hesitate. He pays for every so-called experimental treatment without a single question. The more outrageous the price tag, the faster he signs the check. Danielle's heart skipped. She pressed herself closer to the wall, listening. Another voice answered. Female, sly, unmistakably that of Fiona Reynolds, Henry's glamorous fiancée. She had become a fixture in the hospital halls, always by the side of her stepdaughter-to-be, presenting herself as a model of devotion and sacrifice. "And I convinced him to bring in 3 more private nurses," Fiona whispered with a hint of pride. "All under inflated contracts, of course. The money keeps pouring in. As long as we keep Emily in this state, we'll never run out. The sedatives I'm giving her keep her stable, but she won't wake up. I can stretch this treatment out for years if we want." Danielle's breath caught in her throat. The girl they were speaking of was Emily Carter, only 8 years old. Emily had been admitted to the hospital 4 months earlier after experiencing sudden seizures. Since then, she had remained in a coma, her small body connected to machines that hummed day and night. Her father, Michael Carter, a wealthy construction executive, had been paying for every treatment Henry recommended. Medications imported from overseas, new monitoring devices, private consultations, expenses that easily reached tens of thousands of dollars per week. But the medical reports never fully matched Emily's condition. Danielle had noticed it before. Brain scans that showed no catastrophic injury, lab results that suggested nothing irreversible. She often wondered how such a young girl could remain unconscious for so long with so little neurological evidence. Now she knew the answer. Fiona's voice carried again, almost giddy. "I've already opened 2 more offshore accounts. The poor man is so desperate to save his daughter, he would give away his entire fortune without a second thought." Danielle's hands trembled. She had worked long enough in medicine to recognize desperation when she saw it. But this was something else. This was cruelty. Weaponizing a father's grief to build personal wealth. She stepped back carefully, her pulse hammering in her ears. If they saw her listening, they would know immediately that their secret was out. Quietly, she moved away, forcing herself not to run until she was safely out of earshot. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She kept glancing at Emily's room, where the child lay still, her small chest rising and falling under the machines. Every beep of the monitor now sounded like part of a lie. When daylight finally crept in through the ICU windows, Danielle knew she couldn't stay silent. She searched the hallways until she found Michael Carter sitting slumped in a chair outside his daughter's room. His face was pale with exhaustion, dark circles shadowing his eyes. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and he looked less like one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen and more like a man drowning in helplessness. "Mr. Carter," Danielle began gently, "I need to speak with you. It's about Emily." He lifted his head slowly, expecting bad news. "Has she gotten worse? Dr. Marshall said this new treatment might take a few more months to show results." Danielle drew in a breath. She knew the words would sound insane, but she had no choice but to speak them. "Sir, If you disconnected those machines right now, your daughter would wake up. Michael froze, disbelief flashing across his features before fury took over. He surged to his feet. "What did you just say? Are you out of your mind? If I pull her off life support, she will die." Danielle held his gaze. "No, she won't. Emily doesn't need those machines. She is being kept in a medically induced coma. Sedatives are being administered to keep her unconscious, not to save her. She is being held in this state so they can continue billing you for unnecessary treatments." Michael's face contorted with rage. His fists clenched. His voice rose. "How dare you accuse Dr. Marshall of such a thing? He has been my friend for years. He's the only reason I have hope left. And Fiona, she has sacrificed everything to care for Emily. Do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I do," Danielle said firmly. "And I know it's hard to believe. But last night I overheard Dr. Marshall and Fiona in the medication room. They admitted everything, overbilling, fake treatments, and keeping Emily sedated for profit. They don't want her to wake up." Michael shook his head violently. "You're lying. This is slander. Do you want money from me? Is this some attempt at blackmail? You're playing with a grieving father's mind." "I want nothing from you," Danielle insisted. "I only want to save Emily. Please, give me a chance to prove what I'm saying. I will find records, financial documents, even recordings. I just need 48 hours. Let me show you the truth." Michael glared at her, his breathing heavy, his face red with anger. And yet, deep in his eyes, something flickered. Doubt. He hated himself for even considering her words, but there was something in Danielle's voice, an urgency, a raw conviction, that he couldn't dismiss entirely. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You have 48 hours. If you fail to prove this, I will sue you for defamation. You'll never work in a hospital again." Danielle nodded, her heart pounding. She had just 2 days to gather evidence that could expose one of the hospital's most trusted doctors and his fiancée. 2 days to save a little girl's life. If she failed, she would lose her career, her reputation, and perhaps even her freedom. But as she glanced through the ICU window at Emily, small, pale, and still, Danielle knew she could not back down. If you believe the truth must be exposed no matter the cost, subscribe to this channel and stay until the end of this story. Danielle spent the rest of that day in a fog of nerves and determination. The weight of Michael's ultimatum pressed on her chest. 48 hours to prove the unthinkable. Every second mattered. She knew exposing Henry Marshall would not only end her career if she failed, but could also put her in real danger. People who had already stolen millions wouldn't hesitate to silence one nurse. She began with the medical records. Working in the ICU gave her legitimate access, but she had to tread carefully. Every chart, every prescription logged under Dr. Marshall's name showed the same troubling pattern. Massive doses of sedatives and imported experimental drugs that had little to no documented benefit. Some entries were deliberately vague, others contradictory. Danielle highlighted each irregularity, scanning copies into a secure folder. She printed a few pages as backup, slipping them into the lining of her work bag. The deeper she dug, the worse it became. Emily's brain scans showed nothing consistent with such a long coma. In fact, several neurologists had signed off on notes expressing confusion. Yet each time, Dr. Marshall overruled them, insisting the treatment continue. It was clear he had manipulated every step, silencing questions with his authority. Still, Danielle knew paperwork alone wouldn't convince Michael. He needed proof that couldn't be explained away, something undeniable. That meant catching Henry or Fiona in their own words. That night, Danielle devised a plan. She placed a small audio recorder in her uniform pocket and pretended to make her normal medication rounds. Near the ICU supply room, she lingered. Her pulse raced when she saw Fiona enter, carrying a tray of syringes. Danielle followed at a distance, positioning herself just outside the door. She pressed record. Inside, Fiona muttered to herself, unaware of being overheard. "Another 50,000 tonight. Michael never suspects a thing. That little girl is a gold mine." Danielle's hand shook as she held the recorder. She had captured something, but was it enough? She needed more. The next morning, she carefully approached Michael again. He looked at her with skepticism, exhaustion written across every line of his face. "Do you have anything?" he asked sharply. "Not enough yet," she admitted. "But I will. Tonight I'll catch them in the act." Michael's jaw clenched. He wanted to dismiss her, to call her insane. But the flicker of doubt that had unsettled him yesterday hadn't gone away. For the first time in months, he considered the possibility that his daughter's suffering might not be inevitable. 48 hours, he repeated coldly. Not a second more. That evening, Danielle took bigger risks. She slipped into the administrative office after hours, her badge granting her limited access. She wasn't supposed to be there, but desperation emboldened her. On one of the shared computers, she found something explosive. A series of invoices for imported medications, billed at outrageous rates. She traced the payments through the hospital's system and discovered transfers that led directly to shell companies. Companies with names suspiciously similar to those tied to Fiona Reynolds. Danielle snapped photos with her phone, her heart pounding. Every click of the camera felt like a thunderclap in the silence of the office. If security caught her, there would be no explaining it. By 2 a.m., she positioned herself again near the ICU. This time, she hid inside the supply closet across from Emily's room, leaving the door cracked just enough to see. Her recorder was ready, her phone set to capture video if needed. Minutes stretched like hours until footsteps echoed in the hall. Fiona appeared, clutching a syringe. She glanced around before entering Emily's room. Danielle's breath caught as she watched through the sliver of the door. Fiona prepared the injection, muttering, "Another dose to keep the money flowing." Danielle stepped out, phone raised, recording. "Stop right there." Fiona froze, eyes widening in fury. "What the hell are you doing?" "I know everything," Danielle said steadily. "I've got the audio, the documents, and now this. You've been keeping Emily in a coma to bleed her father dry." Fiona lunged forward, trying to grab the phone. The struggle sent the syringe clattering to the floor. For a split second, Danielle thought Fiona might actually hurt her, but then heavy footsteps thundered down the hall. Michael Carter appeared, flanked by 2 hospital security guards. Danielle had texted him earlier, begging him to come if he wanted the proof she promised. He froze in the doorway, eyes darting between Fiona and the phone in Danielle's hand. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Danielle thrust the phone toward him. "Listen for yourself." On the recording, Fiona's own words filled the hallway. "Another 50,000 tonight. That little girl is a gold mine." Michael's face drained of color. He turned toward Fiona, his voice shaking with rage. You've been lying to me? For months? Keeping my daughter like this while you pocketed my money?" Fiona straightened, no longer hiding her cruelty. "Your daughter is worth millions to us. Awake, she's nothing. You were too blind with grief to see it." Michael's knees nearly buckled. Security seized Fiona as she tried to bolt, her face twisted with fury. Danielle held onto the phone with white-knuckled hands, relief and terror washing over her. "Where is Dr. Marshall?" Michael demanded, his voice breaking. "Not far," Danielle said quietly, "and he'll face the same justice." For the first time in 4 months, hope stirred in Michael's eyes. It was fragile, raw, but it was real. The following morning, St. Mary's Medical Center buzzed with chaos. Word of Fiona's arrest spread quickly through hushed whispers in the staff lounge and tense conversations at the nurses' station. Danielle felt the weight of every gaze, some skeptical, others sympathetic, many confused. Taking down a neurologist as influential as Dr. Henry Marshall was unthinkable to most of them. Yet Danielle knew it had to be done. Michael Carter spent the night in a storm of grief and rage. He had loved Fiona, trusted Henry like a brother. The betrayal seared him like fire. But the faintest movement he thought he saw in Emily's eyelids that morning gave him the strength to keep going. If there was even a chance Danielle was right, he had to see this through. By noon, the police were in the hospital, but Henry had not been located. He had called in sick, claiming food poisoning. Danielle suspected otherwise. She knew men like him didn't wait around to be caught. He would cover his tracks, erase records, maybe even flee. If they didn't act fast, he'd disappear. Michael used his influence to pressure the hospital board into cooperation. Subpoenas for financial records were issued within hours. Investigators traced millions of dollars routed through fake research projects and non-existent drug trials. Henry's name was everywhere. That night, Danielle was back on duty. She moved quietly through the dim corridors, her eyes darting toward Emily's room every few minutes. Now that Fiona was gone, she had reduced the sedatives as carefully as she could, under the guidance of another neurologist who had begun reviewing the case. Emily's vitals were strong. For the first time, there was a real chance she might wake. Just after 2 in the morning, Danielle heard footsteps echoing in the hall. She turned the corner and froze. There, standing at the nurse's station as though nothing had happened, was Dr. Henry Marshall. His expression was calm, almost smug, but his eyes carried a dangerous glint. "Danielle," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." Her heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "There's nothing left to say, doctor. I heard everything. Fiona is already in custody. The police have the records. It's over." Henry chuckled softly. "Over? Do you really think anyone will believe a night shift nurse over me? I built this hospital's reputation. I've testified in court cases. I've been on television. You're just a girl from the Midwest with no connections and a habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Danielle swallowed, but her voice didn't waver. "I don't need to convince the world. I just need to convince Emily's father, and he's already heard enough." Henry's smile faltered for the briefest second before he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You have no idea what you've walked into? This goes far beyond me and Fiona. There are people funding these trials, people who don't want questions asked. If you keep pushing, you won't just lose your job, you'll disappear." Danielle's blood ran cold. For a moment, fear clawed at her resolve. But then she thought of Emily, her tiny hand limp against the hospital sheets, her father's broken expression, the stolen months of her childhood. Danielle drew in a steadying breath. "Do what you want to me. I won't stop until Emily opens her eyes." Henry straightened, his calm mask cracking into something darker. "You'll regret this." He turned sharply and walked down the corridor, disappearing into the stairwell. Within hours, police arrived to arrest him at his suburban mansion. Inside, they found stacks of financial records, offshore account information, and evidence tying him to multiple fraudulent treatment schemes across the state. Back at the hospital, a special medical committee gathered to reassess Emily's care. Under their supervision, sedatives were discontinued completely. The machines that had hummed for months were gradually silenced. Every nurse in the ICU held their breath. On the 3rd day, Danielle sat at Emily's bedside, holding her small hand. Michael stood across the room, his face drawn with worry and fragile hope. Suddenly, Emily's eyelids fluttered, her lips parted, and in a weak, trembling voice, she whispered, "Daddy?" Michael staggered forward, tears spilling down his face. He dropped to his knees beside her bed, clutching her hand to his chest. "Emily, my princess, you're back." The room filled with quiet sobs. Even the most skeptical nurses turned away to hide their tears. Danielle wiped her eyes, overwhelmed with relief. Over the following weeks, Emily's recovery became the center of the hospital's attention. Physical therapy began, and each day she grew stronger. Michael rarely left her side. He often caught Danielle in the hall to thank her, his gratitude pouring out in words that never felt enough. But while Emily healed, the investigation widened. Henry Marshall and Fiona Reynolds were charged with fraud, medical malpractice, and conspiracy. Dozens of families came forward, claiming similar experiences. Loved ones kept in questionable treatments, exorbitant bills that never made sense. It became clear that Henry's scheme was part of a broader network of corruption. Through it all, Danielle kept working her shifts. Some colleagues now looked at her with admiration, others with quiet resentment. She knew whistleblowers rarely became heroes overnight. But when she walked into Emily's room and saw the girl smiling faintly at her father, she knew she had done the right thing. Michael once a man consumed by grief, began to smile again. And as he watched Danielle's quiet devotion, admiration slowly transformed into something deeper. Gratitude became affection. Affection grew into love. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the benches, cameras lined the back wall, and every seat was taken by spectators eager to witness the downfall of one of Chicago's most celebrated doctors. Dr. Henry Marshall sat at the defense table, his once polished demeanor reduced to a pale, gaunt shadow of arrogance. Beside him sat Fiona Reynolds, her expensive clothes unable to mask the bitterness etched across her face. At the prosecution's table sat binders full of evidence, medical records, fraudulent invoices, offshore account documents, and Danielle's recordings. But the most powerful evidence wasn't in those binders. It was sitting in the front row, her small body still recovering but her spirit unbroken. Emily Carter. Michael had refused to leave his daughter's side since she awoke. Now, he sat with her, his hand gripping hers, his eyes fixed on the two people who had nearly destroyed his family. When the judge entered and the trial began, the air grew heavy with tension. Witness after witness took the stand. Hospital administrators, financial experts, other doctors, all testifying to the scale of Henry's scheme. The prosecution laid out how he had deliberately induced comas, exaggerated conditions, and billed for unnecessary treatments, all while funneling millions into hidden accounts. But it was Danielle Foster's testimony that silenced the room. She stood calmly, her nurse's uniform exchanged for a simple navy dress. Her voice was steady as she described the night she overheard Henry and Fiona plotting in the supply room, the invoices she discovered, the confrontation where Fiona had been caught with a syringe in her hand. "Why did you risk your career to expose this?" the prosecutor asked. Danielle glanced at Emily in the front row, then back at the jury. "Because I became a nurse to save lives. And Emily's life was being stolen in front of us. If I had stayed quiet, I would have been complicit. I couldn't let that happen." Her words hung in the air, and even the most hardened courtroom spectators felt the weight of her conviction. Henry's lawyer attempted to discredit her, painting her as an overzealous nurse with a personal grudge. But Danielle's evidence, coupled with the financial trail investigators uncovered, made the defense crumble. Fiona, under pressure, eventually turned on Henry, admitting she had injected sedatives under his orders. Her testimony sealed their fate. After weeks of proceedings, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Henry Marshall and Fiona Reynolds were sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of vulnerable patients. The ruling sent shockwaves through the medical community. For Michael and Emily, justice brought closure, but it could never give back the months lost. Emily's rehabilitation was slow but steady. With every step she took in physical therapy, every laugh that returned to her voice, Michael felt the weight of gratitude grow heavier. And much of that gratitude was directed toward Danielle. He invited her into their lives more and more. At first, it was Emily who begged for Danielle to stay for dinner, to read bedtime stories, to accompany them on hospital visits. Danielle, who had spent most of her adult life alone after losing her parents young, found herself becoming part of a family she never expected. Michael noticed the way Danielle's presence calmed Emily, how the girl lit up when she entered the room. One evening, months after the trial, he pulled Danielle aside in the Carter family kitchen. "You saved my daughter," he said quietly. "You saved me. I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't have to repay me," she answered with a small smile. "Emily being alive is all the repayment I need." But Michael wasn't satisfied with that. Gratitude had deepened into affection. Affection into love. He began to court her gently, respectfully, always mindful of the weight she carried from the ordeal. Slowly, Danielle let herself believe she deserved happiness too. A year after Emily awoke, Michael proposed to Danielle in the garden of the Carter estate, with Emily holding the ring box. Danielle accepted, tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with something other than night shifts and endless sacrifice. Meanwhile, the impact of Danielle's bravery spread far beyond one family. Investigations revealed that Henry and Fiona had orchestrated similar fraud schemes with other families across Illinois. At least 6 children had been subjected to unnecessary treatments. Several were removed from comas after independent medical reviews, and their families recovered portions of the stolen money. Danielle's whistleblowing had sparked a statewide overhaul in medical oversight. She was invited to speak at conferences to share her story on television, but she never grew comfortable in the spotlight. Each time, she repeated the same sentiment. "I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was right." Her humility only deepened public admiration. Many began calling her the nurse who saved Chicago's children. Yet Danielle herself preferred the quiet moments, sitting beside Emily as she practiced piano, helping her with homework, laughing at her childish jokes. Those were the victories she cherished most. Years passed. The scars of betrayal never fully disappeared, but they were replaced with something stronger: trust, love, and resilience. Emily thrived, growing into a bright teenager with dreams of becoming a doctor herself. Michael's company continued to flourish, but he always made time for family first. And Danielle, once a solitary figure in hospital hallways, became a wife, a mother figure, and a symbol of courage. Looking back, she often thought about that night in the supply room, the whispers that could have ruined her if she'd ignored them. Instead, they became the spark that exposed a monstrous crime and gave a little girl her life back. In the end, the story was not just about corruption or betrayal. It was about the strength of one woman's conviction. Danielle proved that integrity can survive even in the darkest corners of power, and that sometimes one voice refusing to stay silent is enough to change everything. If you believe courage and truth can save lives, make sure to subscribe and share this story so more people never forget it.